Everybody, Police Justice here with the Philosophy Society. It's December 27th. We are at the Twilight Cafe. There's people in the room, people online, and people in the future. So I'm doing an introduction to the group again. Okay. So basically, I started my first degree many years ago at Lakehead University, and I started in philosophy. And then my friend said, "Hey, why don't you do the club, the philosophy club, be like the president or whatever?" Because I was so involved with the students when I was there. And I was like, okay. And so I had a completely different view of what like the philosophy club at the university was meant to be or had its potential to be, I guess. And the students would just like get drunk or drink beer and then talk about the papers they were writing, like just kind of be students, you know? Mm-hmm. And I had this view that like it needed to be so much more. Like we needed to model what Plato did in his academy and create our own philosophy community, like create our own sense of wisdom with the people that were there, you know? And that's not what they were doing. And so I deviated completely from those students, which is fine. And so I did that for 5 years at Lakehead University. And I created a huge following. I did more events on campus than any other independent organization. And then I separated myself from the university at the end, and I was just completely kind of on my own. I never learned or got to the point where I turned it into an economic entity where it generated money and it was a business. And that's kind of the direction we want to go, because then it can just do more, right? Like, for example, I don't have money to rent a space because it would just cost me money. So we're in this specific spot because they're being nice to us, you know? But we still have to like spend money here. Everyone has to like order one thing or something like that, you know? And there's courses that are part of like the curriculum, and all of it really comes down to what does it mean to live a good life, right? And part of the assumption of why that matters is like, I think that suffering, meaningless suffering, is a bad thing, generally speaking. Like, it would be good to want to live every day and to be excited about it, you know? Like there's this existential kind of like, I don't know, thing that we have to deal with as human beings. We're super smart. Some of us, our brains have evolved to the point where we know we exist. And we have the power to choose to continue or not. And that's always with us. And when things are good and you have money and friends and you feel good, it's easy, right? But then sometimes things happen where it's like, holy shit, like what the fuck do I do now? This is crazy, you know, or I just really don't feel good. And religious groups, even though there are problems like philosophically, for example, or logically with the things they believe, and some of the things that they do, we could say are questionable, like, why are you doing this? Like, you know, killing innocent people as an extreme case is like, why are you doing that? Or the way that women are treated in some cultures, like, why are you doing that, right? But some of the things that they do get right is like a sense of community, you know? And there are certain social psychological factors that are addressed that are really, really, that have stuck with us for thousands of years, really, you know? And so my reasoning was like, I was raised in a Catholic environment my whole life, but I'm an atheist. I was like, this doesn't make sense to me, you know? Not to say that I'm not spiritual, but I just want it to make sense. You know, I don't want to believe in something that's not real, and then I spend all my time doing this one thing, and then I don't really get anything out of it, when I could be doing this other thing and it'd be more, not just feel good, but I'd get something, you know? And so this guy named Pascal, he like had this dichotomy. He's like, it's called Pascal's wager. He's like, you can believe in religion or not, or believe in God or not. And if you don't, then nothing happens. But if God is real and you don't, then you lose on God. So you don't lose anything if you don't believe in God. So you might as well just believe in God either way. And then if God does exist, then you're good. And it's like, okay, I guess so. But then there's still a bunch of problems, like which God, what is God, which one would be the one? And then do I really want to gamble with it? Is that necessary? You know? And so we could talk about those things. Those are things. But I think that what's really important is like being empirical. And so some of the recent discussions I've had is like, what does that mean? You know, And it's like, you go to your psychologist, you talk to your friends, or you're talking to yourself, or thinking, you're like, what do I do with my life, right? And being empirical means like looking at what really is the case, being almost scientific and observing what's going on today. Like, if things happen to us, you know what I mean? Like, what happened to me, and how did that affect me? And so one of the things that I think is useful is talking about the object of emotion. What is the thing in the world that occurred, or what somebody said or whatever, that triggered me to make me feel this way? And then how can I observe it and evaluate it, right? To understand its integrity. Like, what is the thing? Like, how real is it? And how is my perspective of the thing legitimate or not? And then what do I do about that, right? And so that goes back to like I'm just going right now. That goes back to the like, what does it mean to live a good life thing? It's not that, like, to be realistic would be to say, well, you know what? Being human means we're going to have some negative emotions sometimes, right? But if we look at the way the brain functions, like the state of flow, we don't function well if we're always upset. That's not the way we've evolved. That's not the way our brains are engineered. And okay, so to review. So the Philosophy Society. So I started this many years ago, and my view of it was, we can, when we observe different social groups, right? There's a lot of power when humans get together. We're social animals, and part of the problem I found is that for certain ones, like therapy groups, they're based sometimes, not all the time, but they're based on empirical science and best practices in mental health, right? So at least everything they say, the content has some soundness to it. Not that it's like, the universe written and it's just reality. Like, we always want to iterate the things that we think and we believe so we come closer to the truth, right? So when we look at things like religious groups, the content, we can say, well, there's some things in here that we can at least talk about. They don't really make sense of some of the things. And that's the part of the reason why faith is necessary. And you can do that if you want. Totally cool. But it's important that we want to have the philosophical mindset. That is the thing you're going to use to make sense of everything, including religion. And so what religious groups have done successfully is establish a sense of community. They're together, they feel a sense of closeness, right? And that's good, that's important. Some of the problems, though, is because there are different religious groups, it creates an in-group, out-group bias, which you can see with sports teams, right? Or political affiliations. And any way that we can divide ourselves, right? And we can say that we're different. Now we have a means to dehumanize and objectify the other group and then say we're better than them or something like that. And that just leads down to antisocial tendencies. So that's not good. So what we want to do is we want to try to find an inclusive way to be together. So this is like, there's content, like there's the history of philosophy, like the Greeks and the early moderns and like, contemporary stuff. We could talk about research papers and stuff like that. But then there's like looking at a social group and applying wisdom to what it means to even just be together. Like, before we even get to anything that we're going to read or whatever, if we read something or watch something, whatever that is, what are the properties of our groupness? And how does that show wisdom in it? And so knowing what wisdom is important, right? Like a soundness of judgment and decisions, for example, right? I would say integrating information from our studies of biases and psychology is important. If we know that there's a fire there, don't go that way, right? Unless you need to cook or something like that, right? But if you don't want to burn yourself and there's a forest fire, go the other way. And so if we know that groups have a tendency to have problems, for us to be the wise group, i.e. the Philosophy Society, we wouldn't make those mistakes, or at least be aware of them and like have a life jacket on. Be like, okay, I'm in the boat. If it tips, at least there's one, I'm doing my effort, right? I'm doing my part. And so like an example would be like the Challenger spaceship, they knew that there was problems. It was like the O-rings or something like that when it reached a certain temperature or whatever, then it could have a problem. And then the spaceship blew up, people died, right? And in the meeting, there were several engineers that voiced their opinion, but they were shut down, right? Groupthink was that we want to all conform to the same principle and remove any kind of dissent from that one principle, which was we have a certain time limit. We need to get it on time now. And so in corporate, you'll have the same thing. We have deadlines. We have to meet these deadlines. Anyone that goes against that, we're going to get rid of that person, and then we're just going to meet the deadline, right? And so that's not good, right? So part of being philosophical is knowing how to raise healthy disagreement, right? Because you could be a narcissist and then just, or very disagreeable as a personality trait. Like anything somebody says, you don't know if you have someone in your life that's like that. Anything you say, they're just like, no, and they always find something wrong with it. And that's almost like the introduction to a philosophy degree, is that you just become more disagreeable, or you already were disagreeable and you just find things wrong with what people say. And you're like, I'm going to go to university and study how to do this. It's like, is that really what wisdom is? No, it's not. So criticism is important, but there's a difference between just being unnecessarily, like I said, disagreeable, and then having constructive, healthy criticism, right? So like I was a carpenter for a while, and if we look at the walls here, if you saw like a hole in between the joint, you could say, hey, like as we were building the Achilles, you got to tap it with the hammer, make it nice and flush. Like, okay, cool, boom, and we do it, right? And that's good because it makes it look better, right? And then the quality of the product is higher. And so when we're looking at a social group, we want to, the problem with religious groups, like to give them constructive criticism, and there's not really much feedback or discussion about what is being said. There's usually someone in a position of authority, and we have to just accept whatever they say. This is what it is. And so that's unphilosophical. And very often in society, it leads to negative places. So if God does exist and there is a prophet, okay, sure, but as a human being, like this is what I think Averroes was an Islamic philosopher or theologian. And he said, if God gave you a brain, basically, or a mind, then God meant for you to use that to understand him or her, whatever it is, right? It doesn't make sense for God to give you a prefrontal cortex and the capacity for abstract thought, but then you just completely don't use it at all, right? And have blind faith, let's say. I think there's a place, I'm not religious or believe in like the standard view of God, but if you were going to go down that road, there is a place to have faith. There is a place where you can make the jump. But I think it's really important to be aware if you're going to have wings to do this jump, the wings of faith, let's say, make sure that you're strong enough to get to the other side. If you can still walk a little bit with reason, do that because you know the ground is there, right? So reeling it back, the Philosophy Society does not exclude those kinds of beliefs or groups. We actually want to bring everybody together. That's really the goal. When you look at a cult, right, what cults do is they prey on people and they remove them from society, right? And there's usually some charismatic leader, even though if I have some charisma, that's fine. It's not the point though, right? What I really want to do is train everybody here to do what I'm doing. And then you guys would express the same, like different content that you identify with. Like if you wanted to read Simone de Beauvoir and talk about like second wave feminism, that's great, right? Because you're a woman. And so you can get maybe younger women to be like, oh my God, yes, she's empowering me. This is beautiful. That's a beautiful thing, right? Because they'll maybe connect with you differently, they probably would, than they would with me. Just because I'm a dude, and that's fine. It just means that you can't have one person who's expected to do everything. That's not the point. The point is, as a group, as a society, we really just want to value being wise. And some people may lack the psychological or cognitive capacity for abstract thinking. They just don't have it. If you have prefrontal cortex damage, like if you have brain damage, you can't think in the same way as other people will. It's almost like you're colorblind. You just don't even see it. You can feel things, assuming your limbic system is intact, and that's good. But if you can't reason through stuff, any democratic state will necessarily have problems, right? Because our votes are indiscriminate. Everyone's vote is the same. But if the majority of people, let's just assume, don't understand the merit of what the vote is for, like we talked about climate change a bit, Like in last summer, I remember the governor of California was like on the news, like just going, like he was going insane because his state was burning, you know what I mean? Like to the ground. And that's a problem. We don't want it to get to that point, right? There's certain things that like, you know, I remember in like Austin Powers, like Dr. Evil puts like a laser on the moon or whatever. And it's like a joke. Until a dictator does something equivalent where there's like nuclear weapons that can just from the moon hit the planet, right? Something like that. That would not be good, really, if it's a dictator who wants to just like decimate, you know, certain groups or whatever. So we don't want it to get to that point, right? We want to be able to have a society, all of us together, where we can figure shit out and then do the best thing for everybody, right? Including ourselves too. There's problems with utilitarianism, bro. So the philosophy society, part of it is there's philosophical content, and we can talk about that, right? And I have training in philosophy. I have 2 degrees. I'm on my like 4th, 5th degree, doing another degree in psychology right now. I'm more of a Renaissance person. I don't have my PhD yet. Eventually I will. But there's just so many classes right now. I'm like, if I go to the next step, I'm going to leave all this behind. And I'm like, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So I might as well just do it now. Learning is learning. You don't need to have a bureaucratic title to show that you are more competent than somebody else. It goes back to the merit of what you know and how you can apply it, right? That will happen in due time. So I have some expertise. I don't have a PhD yet, but I don't think it necessarily matters. If someone has a PhD, let's listen to them speak, you know? And let's not appeal to authority. That's part of how the group is put together, right? We want to evaluate someone's argument or what they say based on the merit of the argument itself. Like a homeless person can give you wisdom. Maybe it's infrequent and it's not ever really going to happen that often, but it actually can happen, right? There may be other things in their lives that are happening that puts them in this position. So the philosophy society, part of it is how we're together. That's more fundamental than anything we could really talk about, right? And so my job is to emulate and kind of teach that, if I can, what it means to be together as a group with all of the wisdom or knowledge I have about how groups function. And I'm learning more. I'm taking more classes in January. And then it's not just about me. It's if you guys have anything, then we use the same mechanism. So there's like a philosophical approach or mechanism. And I have an organizational mandate, and I basically explain what it means to be philosophical. And you can, again, disagree with everything I say. If you disagree with everything, then that in itself is a move, and we're going to explore and observe that move. But maybe it's true. Maybe everything I said is wrong. Okay, fine. Let's look at it, you know? And the organizational mandate, it basically goes through being Socratic. So being Socratic, this goes back to like Plato and the ancient Greeks and Plato's dialogues with Socrates. And Socrates as a character, he does it in his own way. It's almost adversarial or antagonistic in some instances, but we just don't want to make assumptions. In some ways, being Socratic is also fulfilling the principle of Occam's razor, right? And Occam's razor would be, we ought not posit plurality without necessity, which basically just means don't put extra shit in there when you can just look what is. So when we first came here, I said, let us be empirical, meaning let us observe what is, what exists. Thank you for being here, by the way. I'm so happy you guys came today. Because it's for you guys, right? That's what I'm doing this for. What is on the table? Like we can just assume stuff like, oh, there might be this, and engage with our schemas. Like if we said, what is on every table out there? There's probably one thing with this kind of cafe that every table has, a board game, because it's a board game cafe, right? But if to be empirical would be to go out there and look, and it might be falsified. We might show that one of the tables actually doesn't have a board game on it. They have like a deck of cards, for example, right? Or dice, whatever. So sometimes our biases, just ways that the brain like processes information, it's very efficient. It just wants to use as little energy as possible because the brain uses up so much energy, right? As that organ uses up lots of glucose all the time, right? And so it tries to be efficient. And sometimes in those efficiencies, it makes errors, systematic errors, right? Like that in-group, out-group bias thing. The reason we have that is when there were different tribes, the other tribe may do very bad things to our tribe, right? So if there's any difference, even just in like some color on their clothing, like if they had like a blood mark from the animal they killed in a certain way, some pattern, we learned to detect that and be like, that's dangerous, right? When really when they did it was because, usually a man, the dude that killed the thing or lived, dragged it back, he liked that pattern and just did that pattern. Everyone just mimicked that because they wanted him to bring it on them back. Something simple like that, right? But the neighboring tribe, I'm just giving a thought experiment. Neighboring tribe, they weren't there for that. It's like when your friends have some funny birthday hat. It means something to everyone that was at the party, but to you, it just looks like a funny hat, right? There's no contextualization for whatever the thing was. And so we learn to be adversarial to things that are different, right? But what we really want to do is, this is the training and the practice part, learn to identify with the humanity in everybody. And not just humans, but sentient beings in general, and maybe AI at some point, because if we don't, then it's going to be more powerful than us. So, and that's for us a little confusing. Like, what does it even mean to do that, right? But it's a very real possibility, So we could some people would say once the generalized AI exists, it will solve all of our problems for us. It will deal with these political issues and whatever else. You could say that and just wait for it to happen, but then you're dependent on the thing. And if there's ever a problem with that thing, now it just falls back on us again. So it might be the case that all of our problems are solved that way, but and then me doing this is very archaic. Or we could talk about like Neuralink, some kind of brain implant that connects us all together and resolves all of our problems. Anyone with prefrontal cortex damage, don't worry about it anymore. We're just going to upgrade your brain. You're fine, right? No problems. Done. Okay, sure. But again, if there's any issue with that, we still have to rely on each other. And so I would say that there's instinct and our biological apparatus, like what we've evolved with. And that's the beauty of habit. He hears me say this all the time. That's the beauty of habit. Jeremy's my drummer. He's cool. I'm a vocalist. So the brain's capacity and our body's capacity to do certain things is in our interest. That's what allowed us to survive to this point. But there's a gap, right? And that's where our brains are so big. That's where learning comes in, is that you can say stuff to me. I have a working memory that holds it for a bit. I sleep, it gets programmed into long-term memory, and then I integrate it into the next day. And I can change my pattern a little bit, my behavior. And I keep on doing that. We live a long time. You just keep on doing that over and over and over again, right? To the point where we build a civilization. It's crazy. Whoa. That's, but before it was like, don't go down that way because 3 of us just got killed. Maybe try going that way instead. Like, okay, whatever, human from the past was like, whoa. And they figured that out. Because I'm being very analytical and very direct and distinct. It wasn't like that. It was like like the beginnings of language, I'm all over the place here. So the point is that the philosophy society is how we're together. And I'm trying to justify that there is a place for that, of how we are together. And we can look at groups. We're going to be empirical. What groups exist? How do they, what measure or evaluation can we assess them in an unbiased way? And then how can we be the best group in the sense that we don't make the same mistakes? Not that we're better than anybody else, right? It's just that we do things a little differently. So we get different results. It's empirical again, right? And then part of it is that to the anti-cult position, right, where the cult takes the person out and integrate them in their own little mini culture and is dissociated from society, we actually want to integrate ourselves into society with your family and your friends and the people you see on the street and how we relate to each other. We want to model more prosocial behavior. How do we be good to each other, right? But then also be mindful of narcissists, psychopaths, and sociopaths, such that they don't manipulate us and take advantage of us and do bad things, right? i.e. like from a political standpoint, it's like, how do we prevent dictators from having control of a country? That would be a good thing, you know, so that the people are free. And you could say that I'm biased. Maybe some people want dictators and they think it's a great thing. Okay, well, let's take the philosophical method and apply it to that, and not just accept what I'm saying as true, right? Let's evaluate it. I'm going to make that assumption that dictatorship is bad. Just not bad, probably a bad thing. And yeah, and so not only does I believe, this is basically my dissertation thesis, I'm just doing it instead of writing the dissertation right away, because then it would just be like a book and a pile of books. I'm like, let's just do the thing, right, and see how it works. The Philosophy Society not only will help you be aware of yourself, it will give you the sense of community, right? But it will, that in itself is supposed to mimic in some ways what therapy does and group therapy, and make you a healthier person for those that have the capacity, right? It's also supposed to have the capacity as a group to deal with the political problems by teaching critical thinking. Like, just in the way that I'm speaking, I'm identifying all these critical thinking things that you would learn in philosophy classes. And that is a way to indirectly teach the critical thinking stuff, to do it to myself so you can see it demonstrated, right? And that's humbling in some ways, because I'm trying to remove myself from as like an ultimate authority figure, because that's not what it's supposed to be, right, for anybody. Like an expert is just someone that is more likely to be correct. It's not that they will always be correct, because they're human, right? This is what it is. We fucking make mistakes. No, we do sometimes. So that's kind of what it means. That's what my vision is. And I think that when I calculate it from like a deductive argument, I think it makes sense. It makes sense to me. So now what I have to do is just motivate people to be here. I have to just like be nice and like do stuff and like be here every week, right? I'm here every week, not here specifically, but every Wednesday. The day may change because I think I'm doing a class Wednesday nights, but I will be here once a week to practice, because I think that going back to the thing, it's about a practice, right? And so the good life, eudaimonia, Aristotle talked about eudaimonia. He wrote a book called Eumenian Ethics and Nicomachean Ethics. He says that living a good life is to be virtuous and a life of contemplation, which is great. But I think it's more than that. I think we need to build on that, you know? Like I said, unnecessary suffering doesn't seem good. It seems contrary to what it means to be human. We're going to find a place for that. And that's like eudaimonia, or the good life, in some ways is the absence of mental illness. And I would define mental illness in alignment with Thomas Sayas, that it's something that you basically have control over, something you can do something about. It's not like brain damage, because the brain being damaged is a physiological thing. It's like if I lose a finger, right? My mind, like I can use my mind to manipulate the other fingers to do stuff, but I can't just grow a new finger back, right? So, yes. So that's why I said there maybe the Neuralink thing will solve all those other problems, but we still want to have a way that we arrange our education and our culture, so maybe it'll just do it on its own, right? And for those that suffer from some kind of physiological circumstance, then that's great, because then they'll just increase their autonomy and they'll be able to utilize these kinds of things more effectively, right? They won't be colorblind anymore to reason, which is good. So in the history of philosophy, like we can talk about philosophical stuff. That's definitely part of it. But like I said, I think the way that the group is put together is always fundamental, you know, and then we just add stuff on top of it. Because I've had people come here and they're like, I've been to other philosophy groups before, and people just argue with each other and basically like yell at each other about things. And okay, and I would say that's unwise. You know, there's a way, like I said, the healthy disagreement. There's a way for us to understand each other. And part of the thing is like not being arrogant, you know, like coming with an open mind and testing any thesis or understanding we have and discussing it. And if we get to the point where it's like the next step is ignorance, then we say, well, I guess we have to do some more reading, or we have to like learn some more. That way we really know what we're talking about, you know? And so if anybody has like a topic they want, I always put it to the floor. I'm just doing an introduction for you guys. But if there's anything you guys want to talk about, we can talk about it. I haven't read everything. I've read some things. And I kind of have like a curriculum that we're navigating with, but it's relative to the people that are here. So I'll always like make that secondary. And if somebody is going through something and they want to talk about it, that's the good life part, right? And the community being there for each other. And then any philosophical wisdom that we have, we would try to help that person out. I think that's a healthy thing, you know? And that's one of the distinguishing things from like taking a class in university. You know, I think those classes are important, and I have some members that I've taken my lead and they're going to Ryerson and they're taking courses there as mature students, and that's only going to enrich their participation in the Philosophy Society, right? But the difference is that I have the time to go through things. So I went through a book called Feeling Good last year. It's the philosophy of CBT. And it basically teaches how to deal with our emotions and whatnot and cognitive distortions. And it was written by a psychiatrist named David Burns. And 40%, 40? Let's check the number. But a lot of people, as that said, that have read the book, they are basically cured of depression, which is a huge thing. I have to check the thing. But yeah, and so they did an external study on people that read the book, and there was a significant change in those that read it and those that didn't. Just reading it on their own did this. And so there's something, and then they compared it with Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and there was no effect for that book. And what so Feeling Good.
Feeling Good by
Yeah.
David Burns.
By David Burns, yeah. And so that's one of like the courses in the curriculum that I've done. The next one we're going to do is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Super good book. And yeah, and then there's other things like I think going through some Plato is on the list, and some Stoicism for sure, some existentialism, Aristotle. You know, there's certain, like Descartes for skepticism, there's certain philosophical things that will help us look at the world a little differently. But then there's some things like I'm currently doing a paper on Wittgenstein's language games. That might not be, it's a little tertiary. It's like, it's still in the realm of philosophy for sure. But for our purposes with the Philosophy Society, for well-being and eudaimonia, it's not like directly there. But it's important to know, you know? But it's just not like, not as important as like, I don't even know, like the Eudaimonian ethics, you know? Or those other books, because they're directly related to well-being. So what brings you guys here?
Okay, so I've always been fascinated with the subject of psychology and philosophy, and I have had a alternate education experience. I guess I travel a lot, so I've experienced a lot of different things, and I'm constantly questioning the world around me and how I participate in the world and how to interact with conflict, especially, and what that concept is. I'm really conflicted with the word peace right now, which I would love to delve into a little bit later. But I am just on a lifelong journey of learning and expansion. And yeah, that's, earlier today, I kind of had an emotional purge and found myself searching up something to do tonight and found this group. And it is something that I've always been interested in getting into a deeper discussion with. So I'm grateful that there's a space to hold deeper concepts of life.
So this is me now.
Oh, and I'm Victoria. Sorry.
What?
Victoria. I didn't
Okay.
say my name again. Sorry.
Just make sure you feel it. Well, I've always had these discussions in the realm of psychology, politics, and philosophy with my friends ever since I was a teenager. And with my uncle, my youngest uncle, I've been follower of many philosophers. And yes, but I've never been in, a few times I've been in such a group, but I didn't like it back in my home country.
Thank you.
Because the same thing that you said, there was a lot of arrogance, narcissism, and yelling and stuff like that. And it wasn't my cup of tea. So I've always been looking for a group of people who I can have rational discussions about things without making it emotional or making it about who knows better than the other person, if that makes any sense. I'm still searching. Maybe this is the one. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very good. And you can emulate that stuff too, right? Like that's kind of the point. And the thing I look at with the emotional thing is if someone, remember the being empirical principle, right? And then being aware of us as a social group. So if somebody, like this one time, there was somebody that came here and they were a friend of mine and they kind of lashed out at somebody because they were vegan and the other person wasn't. And it was not cool, but that became the object of analysis, basically. Just the way that they were behaving and acting and trying to bring light and awareness to that. Was it effective? And just using the method of inquiry or being like observing and then asking questions, just as like two tools in the toolbox to make sense of it, right? And that's the same thing that they do in therapy, basically, really. Unless you have some Freudian psychoanalysis thing that's not being empirical and is imposing things that are not really there. I think part of it, like to maintain a healthy environment, is the facilitator kind of has to embody that, because there are certain biases and principles or social forces, you could say, like natural things happen in groups where we emulate our behavior off of the leader or whatever. And so I will do my best, and if I don't, tell me, right? But it's, it's just, yeah. And that's why I think it's so important to have the Philosophy Society here as like a service for society. Like, like I'm here, so I'm going to do it. And it just can't only be me, like we need to have them all over the place. We need like 15 or 20 in this big city, And so part of the goal would be to have like everybody connected online. They all have their videos. Some videos will be better than others. It's almost like I could have like a network, like the Philosophy Network, and there'd be different channels, and people could watch it. We have that technology now, so it's yeah. Do you want to have a moment?
I've always been interested in philosophies and truths and knowledge, information, search for information, trying to educate myself, especially finding schooling sometimes to be basic in certain respects. So I take it upon myself to like teach myself stuff to add into what I like experienced in school, because I found more of my education was after high school rather than before. Like university and college have quite a bit of information to teach, but yeah, that's a good way to go, and also self-study, lots of self-study. But I really like philosophy, kind of talking about philosophy. So it's yeah, it's always interested me, having deeper conversations than just talking about what you're doing in the moment, right? And my family's very much like that. Talking about what they're doing in the moment, not really talking about anything other than that, or watching TV. And it's like, that's not for me, right? I like to read lots online and keep up to date with things and try to yeah.
Yes.
Even to know what's going on in the news, like I know like some people, they watch the news every day, right? And it can be traumatizing after a while because there's so much like crazy, often like they're reporting on a lot of like stuff that's going on, right? Shocking or whatever. And but for me, it's like I have this issue where I'm not checking the news as much as I could be, maybe. Yeah, might miss something. Well, it's easy to miss like big events, like for instance, how many people know about the earthquake in Turkey? You guys know about the earthquake that happened in Turkey, like in February?
A few months ago, yeah.
That one, yeah.
Yeah, you guys heard about it. That's cool. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, because I wouldn't have known if I hadn't wasn't looking up some stuff online.
So much going on in the world. It's very easy to miss.
Yeah.
Yeah, go.
Well, that's it. That was it.
I was just gonna say that ever since Twitter, I think the nature of news has changed, and we hear so much noise rather than the things that we need to care about the most. And because we have more access, more information from all over the world, we may not understand it all because it's all coming towards us at the same time. And any sane person, I think, if followed every single piece of news, they would go crazy or depressed or whatever. And ever since Donald Trump became the president, because he used to make headlines almost every day and sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, right? Before that, I was avid follower of news. I would read, major newspapers every day. But after a while, I thought that I cannot take this anymore. I have to take some time off. And I realized that if you don't follow the news every day, you don't necessarily miss much because most of it is just dramatized versions of things that are not that important, and they are not. That's what I think. And they are not really helping the dialogue in the society to move forward in the discussions that matter in our lives. They just make us want to read the next headline because that's the news organization is making money off, Like, for example, the situation in Gaza right now, it's a very serious issue.
Yeah.
But it has become a money-making machine for the news organizations,
I think too, the news will focus on certain things that are like officialized as being like worthy of news, whereas other things won't be dubbed as maybe worthy of covering, even though to other people it might be very important to cover that. Whereas the news stations are not, because they're being dictated to by polls what they feel is like
popular.
The subjects and the type of news, right? It's going on. Sometimes other stuff is just completely skipped or missed or forgotten about very fast. Sometimes, right? I think that can happen too. Right?
Well, the issue too is that news agencies get money through advertising, right? And so the amount of views that a specific headline gets will just have more views for the ad. And so it's not the advent of truth, or the perpetuating truth. Because in journalism, one of the predominant ethical principles for them in their code of ethics is to report the truth as they see it. That's like a journalist's duty, but it's not necessarily the case, right? And that and it sucks because it's I'll watch MSNBC and I would say 30% of the time it's very clickbaity. They'll have an on YouTube that's not even in the video, and they'll pick specific images. And And what are those words they use that are have shock value? They're not really clickbait.
with the words too they'll use,
Oh,
right?
mhm.
There's a word for that, like, yeah, words they'll use, like shock value words that don't really. Yeah.
Definitely, because it's just like any other thing right now in our lives. Even politicians are doing the same thing, you know? They say things or do things that they know they will go viral
Mhm.
because they are just craving for attention that they have lost.
Do you think it's like fast food nation, like with the media, kind of? It's like this like product now that's like very accessible and consumable. Like consume it really fast, right? It's like a little blurb of information. It's very shocking and it's like wow and like
Yeah,
attention grabbing
Exactly.
the words they're using and like sensationalizing it.
yeah, go on.
I don't know.
Sorry, I think that this is part of the human nature and psychology, though. Like hundreds of years ago, we had the town crier, right? Would be standing outside and just yelling out what the drama of the day is, and we're so addicted to drama, and it's that part of our brain that like has to latch on to the negative news. Like bad news stories gets a lot more attention than good news stories.
It should.
Yeah.
And it
Right?
should, because again, to like the survival mechanism of us trying to avoid that and trying to keep ourselves safe, we're attracted to that negative news story. But at that same time, we're also perpetuating that in a way with the way that media is being presented to us with algorithms, with Twitter.
Maybe it's our choice though, rather than what news source we're getting. Maybe there's another news source that we find is a lot less sensational and more.
PBS.
Yeah.
If you're online, like if there's certain websites that are probably, more objective, maybe. A little bit
One of the ones I
objective.
like is like WION. It's an Indian website or Indian news agency, and like
Oh yeah.
it's very short. They'll have like 2-minute clips, and they just tell you exactly what
So
happened.
what is it called?
WION. It's like it's a yellow symbol. Yeah. Whereas like other ones, they like introduce everybody, and then they like have opinions, and then they like go through like a historical thing. Like they really try to take up as much time as possible. Whereas this Indian website, very often they're just terrific. They're like, this is what Putin did, and they're done.
Well, that's cool. I like that.
But that background is important too.
Mhm.
For example, right now, the thing that has happened in Gaza, if you don't know the background, you may have a very different judgment of the whole story, you know?
I'm pretty shocked about like people's opinions about what's going on there, and what they feel about it, and
Well, it's a very in my opinion, many people would disagree, but in my opinion, it's a very complicated issue.
Mhm.
And both parties, both Israelis and Palestinians, have done pretty horrible stuff during past 60, 70 years, you know? And at some point, some of them were right about some stuff, and the other one was not.
Yeah.
In my opinion, this is not a discussion about Gaza, but but because I started it, I just want to share my opinion that in my opinion, the problem stems from Europe. And that's when the devastation of Hitler happened.
Cheese loaded fries. We accidentally spread the mayo on top already. We can remake it, but is that fine? I didn't want to waste it.
don't worry about it, man.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Better not to waste the food. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you.
About that problem, I believe the problem stems from Europe because when the Hitler situation happened, and the Holocaust and everything, after the World War II, when Hitler's regime collapsed, instead of European governments solving the problem in their society to make it more equal, so everybody would have equal opportunities and to be safe and have a full life. They just removed the problem of Jewish people and gave it to the Middle East. Say, okay, so you Jewish people, you haven't been treated well here, so you can have your own land, which is away from us. you know?
Yeah.
I think if that thing happened today, we wouldn't have this problem. Today, I believe in many societies, it's becoming more and more diverse, it's becoming more and more accepting of religion, different religions and different views. And I think this wouldn't have happened in the Europe of today. But 70 years ago, I think they made a very bad decision, you know?
That makes sense. Yeah.
That's my opinion. But about the news, I agree with you that we have always had this, you know, we've always been attracted to drama somehow, because drama, as you said, teaches us how to behave when conflict happens, right? Good news doesn't. Good news does not teach us anything, right? Or not much, at least. The thing that helps us survive is learning what happened in the bad news, right? But I think the problem here now that may not be very easy to solve is that human brain and human evolution has mostly happened during the time that our societies were very small, like 50, 100 people,
Yeah.
right? And the information was not that much either, right? The amount of information we receive. Nowadays, in a globalized society of about 8 billion people with billions of factors, you know, human brain cannot absorb all of that altogether. And if it does, even if it does, I don't think it will have a very sane judgment. You
Yeah.
know?
Because it treats it like it's only 200 people in the tribe,
Exactly.
but it's not. Like, yeah.
It's much more complicated.
And this goes back to an issue like, we'll get to the peace discussion in a moment. This goes back to the issue of just us as conscious beings, right? We see a specific perspective, but it's not reality, which we can talk about Immanuel Kant. There's the phenomena and the noumena. There's what we perceive, and then there's the thing in itself. And when it comes to the news or, you know, triggering our survival mechanisms, or just understanding a story, whatever that might be, it's always through the filter of this other person's perspective, and then your filter of what you pick out from what they said, you know? And
How
so,
you feel about it.
yeah. And so that's where, like, we need to utilize a different part of our being, and that's that rational discussion, and that's where science is trying to help us out. But we need to do it with each other as well, which is just basically critical thinking. Like, what do you mean by this? How do we understand it better? You know, look at evidence, right? Not just about like someone's specific hearsay perspective. Like that could be their testimony, but it's not necessarily the case because they may be biased, you know? What did you want to say about peace?
I've been very curious about that word recently. So my mother was Okinawan, so we know we were devastated through World War II. And then when I went, I've been living off and on in Okinawa for the last 10 years, and it's just everywhere. Like, may peace prevail on earth. You know, this strong emphasis of peace, peace, peace.
Talking about Japan?
Yeah.
Oh,
And the question came up during these protests for Palestine, no justice, no peace. And the analysis of that really came into play of there's so much oppression going on in different environments. So at what point is no peace justified? No justice, no peace.
Mm-hmm.
If there's such intense oppression going on, is the importance of peace. So for a lot of Okinawans, it's like, don't rock the boat, don't say anything, no conflict, be obedient, be as obedient as possible. Yes, okay, like comply. And that leads to the narcissists, the sociopaths, the psychopaths who are taking advantage of those things. Something interesting that I watched, I'm a big Doctor Who fan, and there was one episode of Doctor Who where these two warring sides were fighting over this one thing in the middle of the spaceship. And this one guy with the Doctor was saying, we're going to get peace in our time. We need this thing so that we can have the ultimate weapon and we can wipe out everyone from this side. And the Doctor said, wait a minute, a second ago you were talking about peace and now you're talking about genocide. And this general said, yes, for us, that is the same thing. That is the same thing. So that really made me question how many people in this world can have that same thought of peace means extermination of this opposing side. And how many of those people are in power right now, in the past, present, and future?
Are they doing that in Japan? They like being discriminatory against other people, even though they're saying peace?
It's very subtle. I mean, like right now, they're preparing for the war in China, right? And they have said that it's going to be a war. It's off the books, off the record. I went to one of these meetings, and they're saying that they want it to be a war of attrition, where they're going to keep, if there's any battles, it'll be left away from Tokyo and kept in Okinawa. So
You're saying
Okinawa
Chinese
has-
wants to take over Japan somehow?
Well, not so. Both China and the U.S. want Taiwan, and that whole region is very instrumental in that whole region. The Ryukyu Islands, the Okinawan Islands, going from Japan to the Taiwanese territory.
Why do they want Taiwan so bad?
Right now it's microchips, but it's trade, it's economics. Like the U.S. wants that territory.
And China has it?
China technically by name has it, but like how Hong Kong was an independent nation until China recently like did a complete political land grab and overhaul. Taiwan is still kind of independent in that way.
Okay.
But it's something that China wants to come in and do that land grab with.
Right.
And so the big three, China, Russia, North Korea, are kind of working together right now. And then the US, South Korea, and Japan are forming a stronger alliance. They're starting to build bunkers in Okinawa. They're starting to send over the warships, 3 nuclear submarines in the last year to South Korea. So they're really amping up the war. And my fear is, because like right now, North Korea is the target. They've recently launched the ICBM. They've recently launched the spy satellites.
What's
and
ICBM?
International intercontinental ballistic missile. So they're doing testings. They've been doing testings for a while. And North Korea.
North
They're
Korea.
doing these testings.
For these ballistic missiles?
Right. And it's been happening for years and years, but especially in these recent years as the activity is growing. Canada is now in Okinawa, which I've never met a Canadian.
So there's
military
two
person
groups,
there.
there's two major groups that are grouping together that want control of Taiwan.
Yes.
Sort of. Okay.
Yes. But there's also, it's like a BRICS and NATO thing that's going on too.
And the US is siding with Japan and South Korea?
Japan and South Korea are siding with the US because the US has more military power there. It's an imperialism situation. They won the war, so they have set up all their bases and everything in that region. So they want to maintain control of Asia. And China doesn't like that. And North Korea doesn't like that. Russia doesn't like that. So anyway, so back to this whole thing of
They should just be like honestly, I'm just thinking, yeah, but what could solve it is just leaving Vietnam, right?
Taiwan.
Or Taiwan.
Taiwan.
Leaving Taiwan alone. Just let them be their own country.
Yeah.
But then if the US leaves, then that leaves Taiwan vulnerable to China coming in and taking over like they did with Hong Kong. And then suddenly there's no democracy there. Because Hong Kong used to be European. The European colony, British, yes, the colony. So they were used to the democracy. And Japan right now is democratic.
China and North Korea, they're both like only believing like males as being the dictator. What do they feel about women being as a
That's a good question. I mean, like Kim Jong-il's sister has been really, really active in the whole political sphere now.
she
lately.
has, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that it's just the dynasty issue is the big thing there.
Traditionally, it's been like the males or
Well, it's North
Just
Korea
curious.
and South Korea are still fairly new. It's what, 50 years, 60 years? So
and they were part of China before, I guess. Or,
it was all Korea. And then it was split in two. And then North Korea, because of the war. And then North Korea turned into like Kim Jong-un's father, I think, grandfather. And he was viewed as a god and a deity, and they all
It still is,
yeah.
like a Gaddafi.
Yeah.
who's the Chinese leader?
Xi
Mao.
Jinping.
Oh, Xi Jinping. Yeah.
Is that a woman or a guy? It's a guy.
Yeah, so with the peace thing, so like there's peace as an end, like a goal, and then we're going to justify, whatever means to get to that goal, right? And so ethically, we could say like, does that even make sense? Like in your example of like, we're going to commit genocide to get to the state of peace, right? And we could even say that's something that's going on with Israel and Palestine.
Mhm.
And like,
But I've heard that those two cultures have been so intertwined in so many disagreements and arguments that it's good. It's like
You got it?
it looks almost impossible. No, just since a long time ago, somebody was saying it's like almost impossible for them to untangle all that
I would say there's
aggression
very much
and misunderstandings and
in that region.
right, what do you call it? Like not hatred, but like just like I don't know what do you call that? Like just negative kind of just aggressive, being super aggressive to each other, right?
In my opinion, I'm from Middle East, by the way. I'm from Iran. In my opinion, the difference between cultures in Middle East is just like differences between cultures in Europe. There are differences, of course, that makes, for example, Portugal different from Ukraine. But from someone from outside, they would see more in common between them than differences. That's why it is Europe as a continent, as a cultural center, right? In Middle East, it's much like that. And when the countries are even closer together, they have logically they have more things in common. Like, for example, in my opinion, the difference between the culture of Jewish people and Muslims in the Middle East or in that region is just like the culture of Canada and the US.
Yeah.
They say it is different, but in reality, is it really? No, it's not that different. They are both influenced by the same thing. Their music, their food, the way they behave. If I don't say he's Jewish and the other guy is Muslim, you wouldn't understand. Seriously, you wouldn't understand at all because they have so much in common. But because of this whole animosity over land, which in some part is rational,
and religion too, right?
and religion stands to some point. That again, in my opinion, is ridiculous because Judaism and Islam have more in common than Christianity and Judaism.
Yeah.
They come from the same tribe, I guess, don't they?
All three of them come from the same tribe, but
Three? Which three?
in Judaism, because all of them are Abrahamian religions.
That's what I thought, but I'm
Yeah.
glad you guys are
The thing is, both Judaism and Islam have a very, very strict God, with very strict rules to follow. They want to control the way you eat, the way you dress, the way you get married, things like that. I'm not saying that Christianity is freedom, but if you look at it, it doesn't have as much restrictions as Judaism and Islam, for someone who is a believer, right?
Maybe
apart from maybe
because
Orthodox.
it's a more modern religion. Maybe that's why.
I wouldn't say that because Islam is more modern religion, actually. But the thing is, the followers of Christianity have changed because their societies have modernized, but the followers of Judaism and Islam not as much. Because I'm not saying that there's no modernity in Middle East. There is, but it's not as much as Europe or North America.
I question of whether that has to do with Western financial influence and occupational influence, because when I went to Lebanon, it was so advanced. But like Lebanon is politically 50-50 Christian and Muslim. But it was very progressive.
What do you see as advanced?
I shouldn't say advanced, but it's the wrong word.
But it had modern cities full on.
Progressive. It was progressive. Even I read Iran too years ago. It was.
Is it still?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Middle East, something is happening that maybe from an outside view is not understandable. Especially in countries like Iran or Lebanon or Turkey, is more prevalent than others in the region, and that is part of the society is following the modern principles and wants to become more and more away from the religion. The other side of the society is going more and more towards the traditional world, which is about religion, because religion is what kept the tradition, So tradition and religion are so intertwined that's why, in my opinion, you see in Europe and North America, we after the World War II, we saw a break from the religion overall. I would say the tradition, and for example, it even influenced the way people built their buildings and the way they dressed, because they just wanted to get away from that.
I think the thing with religion too is that there's always going to be people who are like middle of the road, and there's always going to be extremist people, right?
But that is with everything.
With extremist views that are in power, right?
I think that is with everything. If you, for example, in politics, if you look at liberalism and conservatism, you see the same pattern of religion. You see people who are far right or far left who wouldn't understand each other or just want to attack, and we have people in the middle who just want to see things more rationally, in my opinion.
Well, like my issue with the holy books, the Bibles and stuff, is that like some of these groups of people are taking it and to the extreme, right, level, right, what they're saying there, and taking it upon themselves to do like God's job, instead of like their own job.
First of all, I think
like wiping like a whole group of people out, right? That's like something God should decide, not humans.
Sure. If God's doing that, it's the bad God.
I think I should mention that because it's important for you to know from what view I'm saying all these things. I myself, I'm agnostic. I'm not Muslim, Christian, or anything. But about what you said, I think religion in itself has tyranny.
Yeah.
That is tyranny of opinion. That's tyranny of lifestyle. That's tyranny, and I think that is why it is handed to you like a package of ideas.
It's strange though that it could be tyranny because so many of the religions have the same ideals and same ideas when you cut it down to the basics.
But the reason
And the
why
tyranny is against other people's religious groups, right?
Well, within too, though, like if you're perceived as a heretic or a blasphemer, there's bad like in the 1700s, there's very bad consequences for you for like Christians, and even today in some Islamic groups, like.
the reason why I'm saying it has tyranny inside of it and you cannot get rid of it at all is that it is giving you a number of ideas, viewpoints in a package, and you have to accept it all or not. It doesn't give you a second option. You know?
Right.
For example, with
It's
liberalism,
black or white.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
For example, with liberalism is a kind of religion too, in my opinion, okay? Because it's a system of beliefs, but it doesn't oust you or, I don't know, to shun you in the society of the liberals if you are not, if you don't agree with one part of it. Let's say, for example, I'm a liberal, but I'm not vegan. The other people will say, no, you're not liberal, you're one of them. No?
Yeah.
But in religion, they say that. The religious leaders would say that. They say, if you believe in God, and if you believe in Muhammad or whatever, you have to believe in heaven or hell too.
Yeah.
Why? It doesn't make any sense.
Mhm.
You know, right? Let's say, okay, this is our religion. This is the package.
Yeah.
If you don't believe it, you have to go for another package.
It's tyrannical in the sense that it's coercing you into what you think and believe. It's like thought police, you know? And that's, again, contrary to like being philosophical and like asking questions and trying to understand the meaning of things and what is.
Looking at the religion more objectively than just following blindly.
Yeah, like, again, like it's just, I think that's where it's better to say that like one is spiritual. And then you could choose to have specific kinds of beliefs that maybe resonate with you. And then you can still be philosophical. And I think it's good to say that you concede on some things, but like, you know, I know this doesn't make sense, but I believe it. Right? That's super mature. Most people can't do that because you would get dissonance. Your brain would be like, no, you know, it's either one thing or the other. Like either this all makes sense or it doesn't, you know? But you know, it's to each their own. Like I think that liberal view, to each their own, is valuable. And, you know, trying to force people to conform and imposing consequences on them when they don't, that's a form of totalitarianism, you know, and it's not, because I think there's naturally going to be a resistance because of the nature of the thing, right? Like when humans evolve to a point of autonomy, they're just going to resist against someone who's saying like, you know, we're going to kill you or hurt your family because one of them didn't do what we don't like. You know what I mean?
Well, why are they becoming extreme? What's their end goal? Is it like control, power?
I think it's a tiered system. I think there's people that want power and they want to have control, and they use religion as a means to an end to control groups, you know, and some of them may fully believe in it, but if you're in a specific political position, you can easily manipulate a large group of people using religion. So, yeah. Hey, Dimitri,
Oh. Hi.
Victoria,
I'm
and
Victoria. Nice to meet you.
Ash.
Ash. Yes, thanks, Ash.
I think I talked to you first, right?
What's up, group?
Yeah.
I believe so. A little bit late.
So we've been talking about the nature of religion and peace, what the nature, I don't know, the nature of peace, but like how peace is used as a justification to commit a lot of harm.
How is it used to commit a lot of harm?
It goes back to Doctor Who.
Oh yeah.
Which
I think Doctor Who can expect that.
depending which doctor you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
It was David Tennant. It was the 10th Doctor.
Oh, yeah.
So
You know the number too, that's a dedicated.
oh yeah, I'm a big nerd. But basically it was the concept of this general, he was saying, we're gonna achieve peace in our time. We need this weapon so that we can wipe out our opponents. And so the doctor was like, a second ago you were talking about peace, now you're talking about genocide. And the general said, to us, it's the same thing. So what is peace? Is peace compliance? Is peace not speaking up? Is peace allowing oppression to occur within a society that doesn't get challenged? Right now with the Palestinian protests, there's the chant, no justice, no peace. So really, at what point can we as a society say that peace can be disrupted in order to achieve justice? So, yeah.
I have something to say about peace. Do you want to say something? And that is, I think to understand the reality of peace in the society, we need to understand its opposite too,
Yes.
the war or the conflict, right? When I was younger, I had many views that I don't right now, right? For example, I was opposed to borders in countries, or I wanted to have a unified kind of country in the earth when I was a teenager. Well, peace was another thing that I thought that war was unnecessary and everything. But let's take a look at the part of the society that is usually warmonger. That is the most part of the history, you would see conservatives are like that, you know? Because they want to maintain the status quo or the things that they have received from the past, right? And if you look at them, my understanding is that they work in a society like the defensive system in our body, right? We don't want our defensive system to attack everything, right? But we wanted to attack, for example, the microbes or the virus or whatever, right? That is going to harm us. I'm not saying that conservatives are always right, but there are some parts of history at some times that the compliance of liberals makes a worse problem than it,
For sure.
And if it wasn't for conservatives, that society would have been wiped out. You know?
Sure.
There has been many examples of that. For example, one of them is during Clinton administration, if you remember or not, in Europe, Herzegovina, what was the name of the country? There was this devastation happening over there. Clinton didn't want to intervene and make a big war out of it. Do you remember?
In Rwanda, in Africa.
No, I'm talking about Europe. But in Rwanda happened again?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they didn't interfere, and situation got worse, and a lot of people got killed. Whereas if United States intervened earlier, I'm not saying it was ideal, but it would have been a better situation. Or the same thing happened in Syria, like in Obama administration. I was a fan of Obama and his policies, but I think this particular policy was not very good. You know, he had to intervene somehow to show Bashar al-Assad that not everything is okay in his country, right? But he didn't do that because he didn't want to follow the steps of Bush in Iraq and Afghanistan, which was idiotic. But I'm saying that peace is something that we need to go towards, but we can't always achieve peace with peace talk. Or the same thing, I had the same realization with borders. Up until COVID, I had that belief that we don't need borders in the society. But when I saw the different things that was happening in Canada and the US, and only because of that border, the situation in these two countries were different. Because two governments were imposing different policies, following different policies in their countries. And if it wasn't for that border, well, Canadians wouldn't be immune to all of those legislations in the US.
I guess it's far from the perfect world, eh?
Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's something that you have to do sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the funny thing with your point is that the current conservatives or Republicans are not doing what you're saying because they're blocking the aid to Ukraine.
I know.
I'm like,
I know, but what I'm saying is that we need to be fair.
sure.
And sometimes those same crazy people say things that we need to think about. You know, for example, one of the craziest Republicans in the US is Ted Cruz, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I've listened to him, and sometimes he makes some good legal points when he's talking about some issues. Like, for example, I remember in a trial, he was talking to the CEO of Twitter, and he was reminding him that if you were flagging the tweets of the president, Donald Trump at the time, you will not be immune to the legal consequences, because you are practically a publisher now. You are deciding what people say or not to say, what is true or not true. That is a good legal point, right? To make. And what I'm saying is that even those crazy people sometimes say
It's true. The Josh Hawley guy, he made some good points when like this pro gender like person was communicating, this professor was communicating that, like, you know, some dialogue, and he's like, well, can men get pregnant? And then she's like, well, now you're being biased against people that are in transition, and had this dialogue. But he was like, the way that it was structured, it did make sense, you know? But then like 2 minutes later, he went completely off the rails and started like taking the view of abortion in a very extreme sense, that like, if you vote in abortion, it necessarily means that you're aborting pregnant. This like senator, or is it Congress guy?
that's what
Oh, yeah, so extreme views on abortion.
Yeah, because they frame it that if you say that abortion should be legal, then it means that women in their third trimester at the end of the pregnancy will be having abortions, and that's only what it is. But that's not the case, right? There's certain situations where it may be, you know, it's not appropriate for a woman to not have the right to choose, right?
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, like I think if you come in with an agenda and you're trying to like prove this agenda correct, that could be part of the issue. Whereas if we come from an inquisitorial perspective and say, well, what's going on here? Can we understand each other and make sense of things? That method is that's what I try to say, what's being philosophical. Because that way, whatever you say, it's not about judging you based on what you say. It's about, well, how can we understand what you mean? Because maybe you're just confused. Maybe I'm confused. Like, who do we know? But if we have a standardized method on how to be reasonable, then we can use that to make sense of it.
I have some people reporting news, right, about what's going on, say, in the war right now, right? Well, how reliable is that source, right? And how objective is that source? So how
it's not.
you know, certain atrocities could have completely been reported wrong because of the news person's like agenda. We don't know, right? How much we can even trust the news sometimes.
But I think we need to remind ourselves that almost everything that we believe or we have in our mind is based on the concept of trust. At some point, we need to trust someone. Like, for example, even a research paper, right? When you're reading a research paper of a scientist, that person has trusted the judgment of people before him, right? If we want to stop trusting, we need to go back from the very beginning and go from,
Sure.
you know?
Yeah, that's like Descartes.
Yeah, which is impossible. I won't live long enough to start everything from the beginning and say, okay, was, for example, Socrates, okay, correct about this issue or not? Or for example, was Darwin correct about this issue or not, you know? If we want to examine every single detail of our beliefs or our ideas, we won't live long enough to get into any conclusion.
Well,
So
so
I'm just worried that the people that are writing the news is agenda might skew the truth.
okay, so there's two things here.
Yes.
One is we want to cross-reference different news reports from different agencies, right? And so I have like 15 news agencies from all over the world. Like I said, there was that Indian website, WION, that's pretty good. Like, and then I have some, like I have CNN, I have MSNBC, I have Sky News, which is from Australia, I have France 24. So, and then I try to look at each of them and try to just look at the report of the event, not this person's opinion on what's going to happen. That's usually a big waste of time, right? Because how are they supposed to know? And then the other point is, so that's to respond to what you're saying. What you're communicating, how do we trust, right? This principle of trust or notion of trust. I feel that that is the reason why it's important for us to have meetings like this and practice once a week, using our critical thinking skills, throwing in the philosophy soup or stew of all the ideas we have going on over the last week. And then together we work on our critical thinking skills on whatever those are, right? And so there's two things. One is our beliefs, but then there's the how to live part. And I think philosophy has been focused on beliefs or conceptual analysis for thousands of years. But the how to live part has been kind of put to the side. And if we believe that philosophy is the love of wisdom, which is what it's defined as, it's not just being reasonable. Reason is a means to an end of living well. Like, why else are you being reasonable? You're not just a calculator. You're not just like...
Reason is good if you have all the facts.
Sure.
Trust the facts.
Yeah, well, and that's what we were saying, right? And so I think that just practicing critical thinking and having like a grinder to put stuff through, like how do we process stuff and how do we think about it? That's really the thing that's important. And then the part of what we do when we're together is there's a function of socialization, right? What socialization is how we almost internally embody certain values or practices. And different cultural groups or different people are socialized to value certain things. And so we're almost actively valuing the critical thinking thing so that you feel good when you do it. Or when someone gives you feedback, it's not like a chilling, like the narcissist just like doesn't like that, right? But if we can, one hypothesis is maybe we can socialize them to accept feedback in a certain way and teach them. I know, I'm hopeful, and teach them that there's other ways to be real and not distort what people are saying to protect your self-esteem in an artificial way. You know, it's like, are you even really getting anywhere? And it could come down to cognitive processing. They just don't have the brain. Some of them may not have the brain to do it. And that's the only way out, you know? So.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But I think, you were saying?
I was just saying maybe it's that social conditioning.
Yeah.
Maybe that way.
Yeah. And so this would be like the antidote to that, if that is the case, you know, where they have to be here. So a lot of they just well. So if they don't show up, then the thesis would be that just as the religion is all over the world, if you have critical thinking hubs all over the world, then there would be somebody that's been practicing every week, and they could sit there like almost like a philosophy monk and be like, okay, right, and be like the referee, you know, and yeah, we can talk about that. I've
It makes me question, how do you go counterculture for cultures that are group oriented, where critical thinking is not at all taught, not at all encouraged, not at all like a thing? Because like when you had the South Korean ferry ship of the high school kids, who the ferry driver was saying, everybody go into the middle of the boat and wait there until we get rescued. And the only people who survived were the handful of kids who climbed out of the boat.
They try to fuck this.
Yeah, but it was very much a culture of, you know, you obey. you listen, you obey, you don't question authority, and this is it. And now coming into this amalgamated culture pot in Canada, where you're having these community groups where some of them are very analytical and free thinking, but then you have these other groups where they're taught, even from parents, you know, don't ever question authority. I'm the mother, I'm the father. You don't. It's because I said so.
Yeah.
And teachers say because I said so. So how do we engage and teach somebody whose entire worldview has been obedience?
So we don't want to be coercive, right? Because we're trying to get away from that. So it's not about forcing people to do it. It's more about having it available and saying, if you want to drink fresh water, it's right here. You don't have to, right? The fresh water of thought, we'll call it, right? It's clean. And there's a purification process. We'll teach you how. Like if the US put, like, for example, if you want, like Elon Musk says, so Lex Friedman says, well, how do we resolve these conflicts, right? Like the Israel-Gaza thing. Like, what are we going to do? Because people will perceive things in such a negative way and then use that as further ways to justify other harms. He's like, what we need to do is unconditional acts of kindness. Things that just everybody would agree is you're being super nice, right? And if the US, for example, in many countries, put water purification systems and just gave it for free, just as a humanitarian thing all over the world, it'd be pretty hard to say that that's a bad thing, right? And if somebody came in and tried to hurt the US humanitarian people doing that, you would have to say that's not appropriate, right? You're just trying to help these villagers with fresh water, right? Just as a thing, you know? And so some groups would not like that, like a coercive religious community maybe, or a political group would be like, oh, critical thinking, that's going to take our power away. Or it's going to go against our dogmatic views about religion. We don't want a philosophical view on religion. We want to have a very dogmatic view, right? Whatever that might be. And you can't really do anything about that. You have to just let that monster be for now, because this might take hundreds of years, really, you know. But I would just say, let's get the ball rolling now. Let's set up the solar panels now and start collecting energy in a sustainable way, find a way to store it, and then utilize it when we need it. If we start a cultural group or social group or educational organization that is doing these things, because there's a ripple effect. Now these guys are somewhat accustomed to it. Now you guys will go and maybe you'll tell a few people, but there's a sense that something happened here, you know, throughout the week. If you choose to come back, that'll grow a little bit more, right? And the goal is that every person, I usually have a whiteboard. I'm writing on the whiteboard at the university. In 2 weeks, we'll see. Every person that is engaged with this will react to other people a little bit differently, right? And part of this is like a training exercise. We want to prepare ourselves for what is to come over the next week, you know? And some people might experience different things. Like we've talked about being in a relationship with a narcissist, for example. And so like, let's say somebody dealt with a specific thing and they come in, they're like, oh, this is what I dealt with. We can talk about prosocial ways to be that philosophy monk, right? In belief, in ways of thinking, but also ways of living. We're just going to utilize psychology, right? When I said earlier, the wisdom thing, how we put things together and make sense of things, how we make decisions and judgments. Part of it is being real. Like there's really a table here. It's not just I believe it, right? That would be a hard thesis to prove. There's no table. It's an illusion. Everything is I'm going to make some assumptions. Everything's being suspended by some other thing. Don't know what that is, you know?
Unless we are in a simulation.
Yes, we can talk about that.
Simulation theory too.
You were talking about like the green energy and stuff like that as like a means to an end for society, like growing and healing. Is that what you were saying?
It was an analogy.
Yeah.
It was an analogy to having like a self-sustaining way of thinking and a way of living, right? That's not, maybe it's a bad analogy, but the purpose of it was just to say that we want to start, I'm looking at it from an organizational context. If you think of like the city of Toronto, how many think tanks are there? Like none, really. Like how many?
Not really?
Well, I don't know. I'm saying I don't know how many philosophy groups are there. There's the universities that will be teaching critical thinking. There's not none. I'm sorry, that's wrong. But I don't really look it up anymore. I guess we could look, but I don't think there's that many philosophy groups that are they're from the perspective that I'm coming from, trying to teach what I'm doing, you know, or in the way that I'm trying to teach it. And so it's like having a light in a very dark room, and the more lights we have, the better. So when you talk about energy usage, you can have coal or other energy acquisition that is not clean. And so if you have clean energy, that's like having a light. There's no negative consequences from that form of energy acquisition. We could argue that maybe the materials in the solar panels are not the best. I don't know if there's cobalt being used in there or something like that.
Maintenance, like how often they need maintenance and being replaced. That's another thing that, you know, is an argument and many people come against them. But yeah, I'm actually, that's very sad that if you don't have a lot of think tanks in Toronto,
Well,
a city of 6 million people should have more.
that's what, like, maybe there's, we can look right now and like look it up, but I don't think there's that many that are doing it the way that I'm doing it, right? With the goal of, it's not about coming here and saying my philosophy is correct. I am saying my philosophy is correct, but my philosophy is very open-ended, saying that I want all of you to learn how to have critical thinking, right? It's not that I'm saying that like you need to be a Hegelian and this is why Hegel is right, and if you disagree with me, I'm going to be pissed off and be angry with you, right? It's more about emulating what it means to engage in critical thinking, and then this level of awareness about our own biases and the nature of social groups, which I think fundamentally, from a deductive point, necessarily makes sense. But I'm open to saying maybe it doesn't make sense. I think it does. I think the argument is sound, you know? And so, yeah, I think I responded to it.
What do you think of echo chambers and that kind of concept? People's echo chambers, like social groups and what they always hear and how people like associate with other people obviously uses them, but then they're limited in knowing other views sometimes, right? And want to hear maybe what they want to hear.
Yeah, so part of it
It's
is,
not some certain, maybe growth is like stunted in that respect and understandings of things, maybe.
yeah. It has to do with like conformity and the in-group, out-group thing again. Like we feel more comfortable with people we're familiar with, right? And so if we're going to have any kind of echo chamber, it's sort of in the past, in previous discussions, I've talked about content and then process, right? And so there's a way that we can communicate and think, and then there's specific things we can think about, right? And those specific things, maybe we're a little inaccurate on, but the way we're doing it, let's have an echo chamber about that. If we're going to standardize something, it's like the process of being philosophical in how we think and how we live, right? So in how we live, it's being able to like, and that's hard. That's like the hardest part, is like modifying habits and like, you know, like that's hard for us. Thinking is almost easier to switch out a belief. So like, oh, okay, it doesn't make sense. And you just let it go, you know, but changing your lifestyle, super tough, you know, really hard to do. Like addictions, just addictions in itself is like evidence of how challenging it can really be, right? So we want to be able to be such a strong group that we can help each other through the socialization process to overcome those pitfalls of human nature, right? And I think
what
it's true.
happens when you don't get enough support?
Well, then you're
social support.
yeah, you can experience more stress. You can experience loneliness. You can just recapitulate the same negative habits. Maybe you just won't grow or change. You know what I mean?
I believe it will just be delayed up until the point where you don't have to do
Dealing with it and still moving forward. I think that's like the challenge, is like staying positive even if you don't have all the 10% supports you need, right? Sometimes that's just the way it goes, and just moving forward.
Yeah, we can talk about what you mean by moving forward.
But then, yeah, you're like your progress can be hindered, I guess.
it will be delayed until either that gets solved or you move yourself.
Yeah.
That social support that you said, that's something that I've been thinking about for so many years. That, as you said, religious groups like, for example, I don't know, Catholics, Protestants, Shias, Muslims, whoever, they have their own groups of people who they hang out with. They have rituals, that when they attend, they are revisiting their ideas and their beliefs and their feelings and their social contacts and everything, right? But non-religious people lack such society. Like, for example, for so many years, I've been looking
They might
for
struggle.
like agnostic groups. Where are these people?
There you go.
Yeah,
Well, do they suffer socially more then because they're a minority?
it's not. I don't. I can't say for sure that agnostics are minority or a small minority. But I can say what I can say for sure is that they don't have the social support that, for example, a Muslim, a Jewish, or a Christian person has. Because, for example, Christians go to church and see each other. We're the agnostic people.
Here.
Metal concerts.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that's something that many people could have worked on, but they just didn't.
That's why I believe tradition has a major role in communities and cultures, which goes back to your thing about borders. I was thinking about how I believe borders not only there to like separate the countries from the political views and whatnot, but it's also to keep their traditions quote unquote intact based on, let's say, different opinions and whatnot. If we want to do it this way for 2,000 years, we guys could do it that way for 2,000 years. And I believe that religion is also tradition in a way that can be passed down time to time. It really strengthens the community and the bond within the community. It's like a common goal, no matter what beliefs or views you have for life, what kind of occupation you are, kind of unites people.
The only thing is, though, religion can be too distracting from other things that don't have realistic ones. Religion can be very distracting. I was studying some yogic films when we were talking about that. Yogic films from the religion can be distracting, depending on how devoted you are to it. Very devoted to it, you can taking everything literally, all the teachings and all the black and white, that can be distract you from other realities, maybe if you believe in the beliefs so much.
An example is like one of my professors, his brother was schizophrenic, very, very intense schizophrenia. And his mother was taking her son, his brother, to these evangelical priests or whatever, pastors throughout the United States to try to get the demons exorcised out of him or whatever. And it obviously didn't work, right? And it just prolonged his suffering. He just needed to be medicated and have some kind of group thing and then be monitored and whatnot. And so, that professor really, he was a huge advocate for me to do this because he understood that goal of it, right? To give that sense of community and in a healthy way. But like I said earlier, like it's important for us to have a group that integrates people that are religious so that they can have a philosophical outlet to understand their religion and to be maybe a beacon of reason for people that are really extreme within their group, So you can say, hey, well, what does that mean? How do you really know? Or what is the arbiter of interpretation? Like, what are we going to use to interpret this? Am I interpreting it? Are you interpreting it? You know what I mean? Like, why does this person have authority over interpretation? Like, what's the nature of infallibility? Can you be wrong? And
Do you think we'll ever get to the point where everyone will be on the same page pretty much? Instead of going in all these different directions all the time. Not on the same page.
Because we are all
Working towards the same goals.
I think it will never happen.
I mean, religion does have the same goals, like when it comes down to it, right?
Yeah.
But people seem to have completely opposite goals often. Right?
I think we're going to end it at 10 because we took 2 hours from the room.
Okay.
It's okay. But we're going to come back next week. Hopefully they'll give us the room again. And Ash, Victoria, thank you for coming. Very awesome.
Thank you for making this happen.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
great discussion.
So that one thing for the peace thing, I believe peace is, in its simplest form, way is just love. In its truest form, to really break it down, like what peace is, I believe it's just love. It's, you did love, have that shit.
I would go deeper though. What is the definition of love?
Let's do that next week.
Yes, next week, because that
I got
will
you.
go into a whole
Yeah,
thing.
that was becoming like a show.
Yeah, exactly.
Cliffhangers.
Very good.
Wait for the commercial.
Mhm.